My fiancé cheated with my cousin while I was working double shifts to pay for our apartments, so I left everything behind and disappeared. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I spent the last 2 years believing that hard work would build the future my fiancé and I dreamed of. Most days blurred into the same exhausting routine, dragging myself out of bed before sunrise, clocking in early and staying long after everyone else went home. 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. My hands were always sore, my back constantly tight, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. But I kept telling myself, this is what real men do. This is how you build stability. I thought every double shift was another brick in the life Maya and I were supposed to share. I genuinely believed sacrifice was just another form of love, and providing for her made me feel like I was finally doing something right. Maya used to tell me I was the only stable man she'd ever known. She'd cut my face gently, smile with those soft eyes, and say, "You're different. You don't quit on people." I held on to those words during my longest nights at work. I'd imagine her asleep in our small rented room, curled up under the blanket, waiting for the day we could finally move into a place that didn't smell like damp carpet and old wiring. That image kept me going, but then small cracks started to appear. Some nights when I walked through the door, still smelling like sweat and machinery, she'd sigh and say, "You're never home anymore." I feel like I'm living alone. I'd stand there confused, wiping grease off my hands, thinking, isn't this what I'm doing all of this for? I'd remind her gently, "Babe, I told you this schedule is just for a few more months. We're almost there." But she would just look away, irritated, like my explanation wasn't enough. I tried to shrug it off, convincing myself she was just lonely, that once we moved into a better apartment, everything would fall into place. Still, something in her tone didn't sit right, and for the first time, I felt a tiny knot in my stomach begin to form. A knot I tried hard to ignore. I wish I could say things got better after that, but they didn't. If anything, Maya's comments became sharper, quieter, and somehow heavier. One night, as I kicked off my steel-toe boots and tried to stretch out the ache in my shoulders, she muttered, "You care more about that job than you do about me." Her voice wasn't loud, but it sliced straight through me. I turned toward her, exhausted but trying to keep my tone steady. "Maya, I'm doing this for us. For the apartment? For our future?" She didn't even look up from her phone, just shrugged like she didn't believe me. The more hours I worked, the more distant she became. She started going out with coworkers on nights I thought we were supposed to have dinner together. I remember asking her once, gently, "Who are you going with?" She snapped back, "Why does it matter? You're never home anyway." I just stood there in the doorway, still holding the takeout I'd picked up for us, the steam rising between us like some invisible barrier, and her phone. That started changing too. She kept it on silent, locked, and face down at all times. If a notification buzzed, she'd flip it even further away like the screen might burn me. I tried to ignore it because I hated the idea of being that guy, the insecure, paranoid boyfriend. But the shift was obvious. Even if she acted like nothing had changed, then something happened that still replay in my head sometimes. My cousin Ethan, who barely talked to Maya, texted me out of nowhere, "Hey, is Maya doing better? She seemed off last night." Last night. Why would she seem off to him? I stared at that message so long the words blurred. When I finally asked Maya if she'd seen Ethan recently, she laughed too quickly and said, "What? No, why would you ask that?" But she wouldn't look me in the eyes, and something in my gut twisted, a little tighter this time. I tried to shake it off, but that sinking feeling didn't go away. I wish I could say Ethan was just some innocent, concerned relative, but that would be a lie. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, Ethan and I have had this unspoken rivalry. Growing up, he always tried to outdo me, whether it was grades, sports, or even who got more attention at family gatherings. He had that smirk, the kind that said, "I know something you don't," and it followed him everywhere. Even as adults, every time we ended up at the same dinner table, he would slide in these subtle jabs like, "Man, you still working those long shifts?" I don't know how Maya puts up with that. I used to brush it off, thinking he was just being the same competitive cousin he'd always been. But after that strange text about seeing Maya last night, The puzzle pieces started shifting in ways I didn't like. I remember asking her again, more carefully this time, "Did you run into Ethan recently?" She paused just half a second too long before answering, "No, babe. Why would I see him?" Her smile looked forced, like it was held together with string. The thing is, Maya had met Ethan enough times that pretending they barely knew each other didn't make sense. She used to complain about how smug he was, how he talked like he owned every room he walked into. So why was she suddenly acting like he was irrelevant? Then my mom invited us both over for a Sunday dinner, and Ethan showed up earlier than usual. He slid into the chair across from me, grinning, and said, "So, how's the apartment hunt?" Maya said, "You guys are close." The way he said her name made my stomach tighten. When I looked over at Maya, she was staring down at her plate, chewing slowly. Avoiding my eyes, it was such a small moment, just a few words. A glance, but something about it made my skin crawl, like there was a conversation happening between them that I wasn't part of, or supposed to know about. I tried to push the thought away, but it lodged itself in my mind, heavy and impossible to ignore. By this point, I was exhausted in more ways than one. I'd been working double shifts for months, and every night when I came home, Maya seemed different. There were nights she'd tell me she was going out with friends, but her outfits suddenly looked less like casual hangouts and more like date night dresses. One evening I asked gently, trying to keep my voice calm despite the knots in my chest, "Hey, who are you meeting tonight?" She froze for just a second too long, then said, "Just some coworkers. Nothing important." "Why does it matter?" Her tone was sharp, but controlled. I wanted to trust her, to believe that she wasn't hiding anything, so I nodded and tried to focus on unpacking my lunch. But the tension lingered in the room like smoke I couldn't blow away. I started noticing the little things. Her phone was never where it should be. It stayed locked, face down, even when she wasn't using it. Notifications would appear and disappear before I could catch them. When I casually asked if she had any plans with Ethan, she laughed too quickly, too bright, and said, "Ethan, we barely talk." Why would you even ask that? That laugh should have comforted me. It didn't. A coworker of mine even mentioned seeing someone who looked exactly like Ethan at a cafe near our apartment the night before. "Sitting awfully close to a woman who looked like your fiancée," they added. My stomach turned, twisting into knots I didn't know I had. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was imagining things, but something was off. I could feel it. Every late night, every girl's night, every secretive glance at her phone, they were pieces of a puzzle that I didn't want to see completed, and I had a sinking feeling in my gut that whatever was happening, I wasn't ready to confront it yet. But I knew deep down, the truth was creeping closer. It was a Tuesday, the kind where my double shifts seemed endless, and my body felt like it had been hollowed out and refilled with exhaustion. My phone had died early that day, so I borrowed a coworker's charger and plugged it in while grabbing a quick coffee break. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just the usual texts from my mom, work updates, and Maya asking if I could pick up groceries. Then a notification popped up in the family group chat. "Ethan, take care of Maya tonight." Broshi looked exhausted after last night. I froze mid-sip, the bitter taste of the coffee suddenly burning my throat. My hands shook as I scrolled back through the thread, trying to make sense of it. There were subtle hints, things that should have been innocent, but now screamed otherwise. Small jokes between Ethan and Maya, emojis that didn't feel right, offhand comments about late nights and secret dinners. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone tighter, heart hammering. I typed her name in the search bar, scrolling through past conversations. Messages I'd never thought to check. They were there. Subtle, careful, flirty. They laughed over things I didn't even know had happened. I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt, like gravity had shifted. I tried to send her a text immediately, "Maya, what is going on? Are you and Ethan?" The reply came minutes later, cold and detached. "I'm busy. We'll talk later." That later felt like a dagger. And then, as if the universe wanted to crush me entirely, another cousin, someone I trusted, slipped me a private message. "I don't know how to say this, But Ethan has been bragging about something involving Maya. I stared at my phone, numb. Every single hour I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. And suddenly, it all felt meaningless. The man I loved, the woman I trusted. The family I thought I could depend on, they'd all become strangers in a heartbeat. And in that moment, I realized my life, the one I was building so carefully, was about to crumble in ways I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That gnawing feeling in my chest had grown into a constant weight, and I knew I had to find out what was really going on. I started paying closer attention, noticing every little inconsistency in Maya's stories. When she said she was working late, I'd check the bank app and see transactions from bars and restaurants I didn't recognize. When she claimed she had lunch with a coworker, I'd notice charges for hotel parking. My heart sank every time the numbers didn't match her words, but I had to stay calm. I had to gather evidence before jumping to conclusions. One evening, I casually asked, "Hey Maya, did you go out with anyone today?" She looked up, startled, then replied, "No, I was busy." The hesitation in her voice was enough to make my stomach tighten. I started keeping a small notebook, jotting down times, dates, and odd details. Texts from friends, random sightings, anything that might help me piece together the truth. I even visited the building manager to discreetly ask if anyone unusual had been entering the apartment at odd hours. The security cameras were old, but they might show something, anything, to confirm the sinking suspicion in my chest. Each little piece of evidence I collected added fuel to the fire of dread building inside me. And then Maya started changing in the apartment too. She barely spoke, avoided eye contact. And when I mentioned the cameras or the weird transactions, she'd snap, "Why are you acting so paranoid? You're losing it." Her defensiveness only made me more certain that something was horribly wrong. I realized I was digging into a truth. I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. I had to see clearly. Even if what I found shattered everything I believed about love, trust, and the person I thought I knew better than anyone by the time I went to bed that night. I wasn't just anxious, I was terrified of what tomorrow's discoveries might hold. I wish I could unsee what I saw. I finally got access to the apartment's security footage, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the night before. My double shifts had left me raw and exhausted, but nothing prepared me for this. There she was, Maya walking up the hallway, laughing softly, holding Ethan's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. My chest felt like it had been crushed by a freight train, and I had to sit down on the stairs, blinking to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Then the clip changed. They kissed. Not a quick, accidental pecan intentional. Lingering kiss against the wall outside the door I'd paid for, the apartment we'd planned to share. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with betrayal. Every single sacrifice I'd made, every double shift, every night I went to bed sore and lonely, it all seemed meaningless. I'd been financing their affair, blind to it, completely oblivious, while they smiled and touched in the space I called home. I dropped my phone. The sound of it hitting the floor felt like thunder in the empty security office. My hands shook uncontrollably. My head throbbed. My stomach churned. I felt like vomiting, but nothing came out. All I could do was sit there, frozen, watching the videos on repeat, trying to comprehend that the woman I loved and my own cousin had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even imagine. I thought about yelling, confronting them, tearing everything apart, but the anger wasn't there yet. All I felt was numb, hollowed out, like someone had scooped out my heart and replaced it with lead. I slumped against the wall, whispering under my breath, almost inaudible, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." And in that silence, the world felt impossibly heavy. The man who believed hard work built love was gone, replaced by someone broken, betrayed, and desperate to find a way out. But little did I know, this was only the beginning of uncovering the full extent of their deception. After that night, I realized confrontation wasn't an option, not yet anyway. My hands still shook, thinking about what I'd seen, and my chest ached from betrayal so sharp it felt like it would never heal. I decided to gather everything I could: texts, receipts, photos, anything that might confirm how long this had been going on. I started recording casual conversations, just little things, noting inconsistencies in her words and tone. Each lie she told now felt like a thread I could pull, and I desperately needed to understand the full tapestry before making any move. I reached out discreetly to a few relatives, the ones I trusted, and their comments sent chills down my spine. I've noticed Ethan acting strange around her. Always whispering, always smiling in ways that make me uncomfortable, one whispered over the phone. Another added, "I don't want to get involved," but I saw them laughing together last weekend, holding hands when they thought no one was looking. Every story, every small observation, fit together like pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to notice. Even at home, Maya began acting differently. She was cold, distant, and avoided even casual eye contact. Whenever I brought up the tiniest detail, like a suspicious late-night call, she would deflect, accusing me of being paranoid or obsessive, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Little slips that confirmed what I already feared. A friend I trusted suggested something that made my blood run cold. "Maybe you should disappear quietly. Don't give them the reaction they want." At first I dismissed it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Both of them thrived on manipulation, and any emotional confrontation might only give them power over me again. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying and liberating at the same time. I had a choice. I could let this destroy me, or I could quietly take control, reclaim my dignity, and plan my exit. But the thought of leaving everything behind, everything I'd worked for, the apartment, my life, was terrifying. And yet part of me knew it might be the only way to survive. By this point, I knew I couldn't stay. Every glance from Maya, every smirk from Ethan, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd spent years building a life for the two of us, only to realize I'd been building it for someone else. The thought of confronting them directly filled me with dread. I didn't want their gaslighting, their lies, their manipulations anymore. So I started planning my exit quietly, methodically, like a soldier preparing for battle. First, I withdrew my last paycheck, careful not to alert Maya. Then I closed our joint accounts, leaving nothing she could access without me. I packed only the essentials: clothes, documents, a few mementos I couldn't bear to destroy, and left behind everything else. The furniture, the decorations, the apartment we had both dreamed about. Every item I left behind felt like a small weight lifting off my shoulders. Before I left, I wrote a note, short, deliberate, and cutting through every lingering doubt. I know. Don't contact me. I blocked their numbers, social media, and anything that could tie me to them. I felt a strange mixture of fear and liberation as I stepped out into the cool night air, suitcase in hand. The city lights blurred past, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Every sound of the bus engine seemed to echo the pulse in my veins, fast, nervous, alive. I wasn't just leaving the apartment. I was leaving the betrayal, the lies, the exhaustion, and the humiliation behind. I was leaving them to face the chaos they had created without me to shield them, to cover for them, to make excuses. As the bus pulled away, I glanced back at the city skyline one last time. My stomach churned with uncertainty, but deep inside, I knew this was the only way to reclaim myself. And yet, as the lights of the city faded behind me, I couldn't shake the thought, would I ever feel safe again? I stayed silent, completely silent. No calls, no messages, no social media updates, nothing. For the first time, I let them live without me holding the scaffolding of their lives together. And almost immediately the chaos started. Maya called repeatedly, her voice oscillating between panic and anger. "Where are you? What the hell is going on?" Ethan sent messages dripping with outrage, trying to paint me as irrational and unstable. Every ping of my phone was a jolt of adrenaline, a reminder that the life I had left behind was imploding, and I was watching it from the safety of distance. Relatives reached out, curious, concerned, trying to mediate. But I stayed ghosted, carefully unreadable. Each update I received through whispers and screenshots made my chest tighten. Maya and Ethan were already turning on each other, blaming, shouting, tearing down the illusions they had built. He left everything. Can you believe him? She texted to a friend, and Ethan, in a rage, tried to spin it. I didn't do anything wrong, he's overreacting. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were fighting over the chaos they created while I was free of it. One evening, a distant relative sent me a screenshot. Ethan frantic, trying to explain to Maya why he didn't deserve the blame. While she's visibly furious, pointing fingers, I could almost see the apartment I paid for crumbling under their incompetence, their lies, and their selfishness. Every late-night worry I'd had, every gut twist, every suspicion, it was all justified. Sitting in my new apartment, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. The weight I'd carried for months, the emotional labor, the betrayal lie, wasn't carrying it anymore. They didn't get the confrontation they wanted, the explosive meltdown they thought they could manipulate. For the first time in years, I felt untethered. But even in this freedom, a tiny voice lingered in the back of my mind. Was this enough? Had I truly escaped, or was there still a piece of them I needed to destroy, quietly, completely, and without? Ever looking back, moving to a new city felt like stepping into another life. I rented a tiny apartment, nothing fancy, just enough space to breathe without ghosts of the past lurking in the corners. I got a job that didn't devour every ounce of me, where I wasn't constantly sacrificing myself for someone else's comfort. For the first time in months, I cooked my own meals, made my own rules, and slept without the knot of dread tightening in my chest. Therapy became my refuge. I spoke aloud the things I'd buried for years, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, and each session peeled back layers of numbness I didn't even realize I was carrying. I began to understand just how much control Maya and Ethan had tried to exert over me, how much they thrived on my labor and trust. With every realization, I felt a strange mix of grief and liberation. Friendships slowly formed, tentative and cautious but real. People who valued honesty, who didn't manipulate or guilt me, who didn't require me to sacrifice myself for their benefit. I learned to laugh again, to go out for simple nights without wondering what messages I was missing, who was talking behind my back. One morning, while making coffee, I realized I hadn't thought about Maya or Ethan for an entire week. The thought hit me like sunlight through a dusty window light, warm and piercingly bright. I felt no anger, no longing, no residual hope that they'd change. I simply felt free. I took a deep breath, smelling the fresh coffee and the faint scent of the city drifting through my window. And for the first time in years, I smiled without guilt. The weight of their betrayal, which had seemed unbearable, was finally lifting, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. And as I looked out over the skyline of my new life, I realized something profound. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't about revenge or confrontation. Sometimes the strongest act is simply surviving and choosing yourself above all else. But even with peace settling in, I couldn't shake the curiosity nagging at the edges of my mind. What had become of them after I disappeared? Months passed and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't dared hope for. I worked, I slept, I laughed, and I rebuilt myself from the inside out. Then, through a distant relative, I learned what had become of Maya and Ethan. The news was almost anticlimactic and, yet, deliciously satisfying. Maya and Ethan had destroyed each other, emotionally and financially. The apartment I had once paid for, they lost it. Both of them unable to manage the bills, unable to manage each other, had spiraled into the chaos they had created together. Maya tried to blame Ethan for everything, claiming she was the victim, while Ethan insisted he was the real wronged party. Their words, their anger, their manipulations, they played out in front of relatives who had once whispered warnings I had ignored, and the bitterest part, they had no one left to shield them, no one to clean up the mess, no one to excuse their behavior, no one to work double shifts while they laughed behind my back. I felt nothing but calm as I read the updates. No anger, no triumph, no lingering desire for vengeance. I realized that my disappearance had been the most powerful move of all. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't confronted, I hadn't given them a reaction. I had simply walked away, taking my dignity with me and leaving them to the consequences of their choices. Sitting on my small balcony, the wind brushing across my face, I let out a long, quiet breath. I had survived the betrayal, survived the manipulation, survived the emotional weight of the people I once trusted the most. And in surviving, I had reclaimed something far more valuable than revenge: peace. Sometimes I think about them not with anger, not with longing, but with quiet acknowledgement. I can almost hear Maya's voice and Ethan's laughter in my memory, but it doesn't hurt anymore. The strongest revenge, I realized, wasn't in confrontation or punishment. It was in walking away and never giving them another chapter in my story. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free.